Welcome to The Braveyard. Today's guest is an incredibly talented musician with multiple viral songs. They are Cali local and have toured with other artists like Lauren Sanderson and G-Flip. They are a mental health and trans rights activist whose storytelling through their music has moved us all. Their music is a safe haven for those feeling alone or isolated, and their shows are a safe space for everybody to be themselves. They are somebody that I admire greatly, and I could not be more excited to welcome to the podcast. So please give a warm welcome to the incredibly talented and absolutely inspiring Miki Ratsula. Hi, Miki. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So good. I'm so honored to have you on here. Obviously, I'm a massive fan, and it's just a complete privilege to sit down and get to chat with you. And have been a massive fan. Me and my partner both are. Um, I just want to kind of dive in and start off. Obviously, this podcast is about inspiring bravery and courage and inspiration, specifically for the queer community and for our trans youth. And you are somebody that is such an advocate and you're so vulnerable with your storytelling. Where did that come from? Where do you find the ability to just go so raw and empathetic in your music?
I think I it's funny. I feel like I should know. I should know where it comes from. I think just as long as I can remember, I've always been someone who in my circle is very I have always loved talking about myself and sharing my experience. And I don't know if it's like partly the entertainer in me since I was a child was always talking about myself and wanting to be on camera and just wanting to, be an open book. Um, but I think, I feel like I've just always I've always been like a touchy person. I've always wanted to like hug all my friends. I always wanted to talk to all my friends. I always wanted to like be someone who just like talked about everything. Um, and it's funny because I feel like when I reflect on my childhood and the way like I was raised, you wouldn't think that that would have harbored me being so open about my emotions and everything. You feel like it would do the opposite. So that's where I'm kind of confused because I don't know where like it came from. But I think just when I started writing music, I wrote music purely as a tool for myself to process things I was feeling. And it just felt right. And it felt like the way I was intended to make music, and it helped me process things and heal through things and also celebrate certain things. And I think the first time I put out a song that was very vulnerable and authentic and I saw what it did to people, I think that was just like, oh, okay, so I'll just keep doing this. Like this clearly matters to people. And it felt right to me to make music like that and to see that it impacted people's lives and affected them. I just felt like if I feel comfortable doing it and I have the privilege to do it safely, then why wouldn't I? And so I think it just kind of came from it just happened and then I stuck with it type of thing. But I really haven't thought too far of where it came from, but I'm glad. I'm honored to be able to be in this place within myself where I can be so open.
Yeah. And I think it's something that we need in our community right now. When we look at what's happening constantly in media and media surrounds our life now. There's really no escaping it.
Yeah.
And when you're seeing headlines constantly and just fear and discrimination thrown at you every day, like I'm comfortable in my transition. I consider myself privileged. I live in Vancouver, Canada.
Mhm.
And so I don't go up against majority of the discrimination that happens around the globe, but it's still defeating for me. So I can't imagine how it feels living in, unsafe conditions and unsafe neighborhoods. And, especially in the States now with all of this legislation that's coming through,
Yeah.
it gets really overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I think that having an escape through music, which has always been one of my biggest tools for healing
Mhm.
personally, it's just music was my escape from bullying and from, everything. I was raised by a single parent that was working all the time. And that was my way of just shutting out the world and
Right.
being able to go inward and feel safe was in music.
Mhm.
And so you provide that now in such a terrific, vulnerable way where people just get instantly lost in it. And your storytelling and all of your lyrics is so raw and authentic. And I think that that's something it's crucial for our community to have and celebrate right now.
I appreciate that. And I think that also, like, going back to your last question, like, also is why I felt such a desire to make such authentic music is because I always say that I'm trying to just be the artist that I wish I had growing up. And I wish, I just know I would have probably saved myself uh, a lot of time from some dark thoughts and places. But ultimately, everyone's journey is it's why I'm here. But I think that's also part of it. Is like I just really want to be this artist that I wish I had growing up, and which is why I don't hesitate to be so open about my story and my journey, and whether that's in my music or whether it's just in the way I present myself on stage or just talk about my experience. Um, it's tied into exactly that as well. Like if I have this platform and I have this privilege to do so safely, why wouldn't I use this platform to be as honest as I can.
And honestly, we're all grateful for it. So
To be sure.
just you touched on your childhood a little bit, and I'd love to hear just a little bit of the early years of your life. I think, specifically for non-binary people, in my transition and my experience, I was thrown into a binary, obviously male, gender role throughout my childhood. But I'm curious to know what it's like in a non-binary perspective, where I assume you were thrown into a gender role as well.
Yeah.
And there it wasn't necessarily that you wanted to transition into another gender role, but you weren't associating with the gender that you were being placed into either. Can you tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about what that discovery was like for you?
Yeah. So I feel like I've always known deep down I wasn't a cis woman. I just knew that. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the vocabulary was for it. I just had this feeling. And there's one of my favorite things I ever like found out about myself was that this video. Thank God my dad was someone who like filmed all the time. Like I have so much footage of me as a child. And there's a video of me I was 4 years old, and I had like in my bathroom, I'd put like a bathroom sign and some made up word. I made it up. I I have it tattooed on my leg. It's like AIKMOH, and I said Icmo. And I like wrote this on my bathroom door, and there's a video of me telling my dad like, "This bathroom is the boys' bathroom. Like my bathroom is the boys' bathroom." And I like made this, and there was just this whole thing like very clearly me at that age. That was my way of being like, "This is my bathroom, and this is a boys' bathroom." And obviously, at that when I'm 4 years old, I don't know what being non-binary is. I just knew I must have known like the alternative of what I am is this at the time.
Yeah.
And so when I remember when I first saw that video, and I'd seen that video before my gender journey, and I was just like, "Oh, that's so cute and funny," and I'm just being a little kid. And then once I, really came to terms with my identity and came out and have, got my gender affirming care and everything, of watching that video now from this perspective, I was like, oh my God, like that's me knowing who I am. And it just like really, I don't know if you felt like this too. I feel like when you're later into your transition and coming to terms with your identity, and you reflect on moments in your childhood and your upbringing and being like, provide context for yourself. You're like, that's why I was thinking that thing. That's
Totally.
why I said those things. And so I feel like that's what I've been doing a lot, is realizing like just, and it's just very affirming to be like, I knew all along, like and that's, I wish, that kid knew, I could tell them that, everything's going to be okay. But, yeah, I was definitely like always expected to wear dresses, and, always celebrated for my pretty long hair. And, I played a lot of soccer though, so I was very clearly like a tomboy, and very clearly like I never wanted to wear the dress with my mom, and I used to fight about it all the time. Um, and but it was what was expected. But I think like because I played soccer and I'm such like a tomboy and sporty person, like
Mhm.
it wasn't as intense either because I was like always just like at a soccer field. So I didn't really go anywhere either where I was, expected to dress a certain way like that. That happens sometimes. But um yeah, I remember when I came out. So I came out as well, she came out as like queer, like in 2016 when I started dating my now wife.
Mhm.
That was basically I was just like, I'm not straight. This is my partner, and that's all that I know, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And my family was like super cool with it, and I knew that I knew everything would be fine. But it wasn't until I realized that I was non-binary and came to terms with that. Like throughout, I think COVID was really like when the lockdown first happened. That's where I was just like forced to sit with all these thoughts
Yeah.
and forced to sit with these thoughts that I was burying down for so long. I had a lot of internalized transphobia because, I think when I first cut my hair, people were like, "Oh, you're gonna end up trans," like we know it, and I was like, I hate when people tell you what your journey is. It's like I think the most disheartening thing people can do.
Totally. Yeah.
And because I felt that pressure to prove people wrong, I like built all this hatred towards like my trans identity, and so I just like shoved it down and didn't think about it. And so like the lockdown happened, it got to a point where like I couldn't handle it anymore. I had to like be honest with myself. And I remember like I feel like I was like, okay, I don't know how to explain being non-binary to my parents, like to my family. Like
Mhm.
I like I feel like I think it's similar to people who are bi. Feel the same thing. They don't feel gay enough. They don't feel straight enough. Like they feel this weird in between where people don't understand.
Yeah.
And I think it feels very similar as a non-binary person. Is there's this lack of understanding of like, what do you mean you're just not either? Because as you know, it takes unlearning the entire gender binary to understand uh,
Yeah.
gender. Um and it was difficult at first. And I think it was just more of like they didn't understand. I mean, they both responded differently and they were ultimately like very loving. But it was definitely like me and my mom, especially, like we butt heads for like a couple months after. Like it was like, adjusting to my pronouns was hard, like adjusting to just like not seeing me as a daughter was hard.
Mhm.
Um, and I think something that was really helpful was like going back to that video I found when I was 4. That was something that was really cool to like connect with my dad because he filmed it. And then when I, came out to him and everything, I was like, Dad, remember this video? Like, that's that. And it was like, it was cool to watch him have this like aha moment of like, oh my God, and just like seeing like just evidence of like who I am and who I've always been.
Totally. Yeah.
Um,
And validation of like, look,
yeah,
this was me. All this has always been me, This
yeah,
isn't,
yeah,
it's not new.
yeah. And it's, I feel like I'm just in this period of my life where I'm, doing a lot of reflecting on my childhood and upbringing. And like I said, like I continuously provide context for certain memories I have where I'm like, oh, I said this or did this or whatever. I'm like, oh, it's because I had these thoughts, but I didn't know at the time what that meant. And all that. But overall, I mean, I had a very safe upbringing when it came to my queerness. My parents helped pay for my top surgery, all that stuff. Which I knew I was never at risk of losing my home or my family.
Yeah.
It wasn't. My mom and I had a really rough couple months, but I knew my safety was not at risk. So
Mhm.
that was very obviously um nice. That was not something I had to worry about. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun reflecting on your childhood and providing context. And I think it's a very bittersweet feeling because there's a part of me that I'm like, man, right? Like I wish I knew then. Like I wonder what could have
Totally.
been. But then also I'm like, but if I'm here because of my own journey and I wouldn't
Yeah.
be the same person or that. So yeah.
And I think I'm going through a lot of similar things. Like you talked about internalized transphobia, and I didn't even realize how deep that was for me.
Yeah.
Until I we haven't publicly announced our relationship yet, but my partner's trans, and I think by the time this airs, we'll have announced it anyways. So, um, what with me and him, we've known each other since we were 13 years old, and we were best friends.
Wow.
We
Wow.
just He transitioned well before I did, and then he was such a guiding light for me when I came to terms with my trans identity.
Mhm.
And he's a musician. Like he had gone off and, he got married. I was in other relationships. We always just cheered each other on. And then him and his ex split. Me and him started our first company together. Um, and we just, we spent every single day together. We were traveling for work together. We got so close. Like his family became my family. It was just this really close knit unit, but never for a moment were we looking at each other like, oh, like this could be my person. It was
Right.
just like, this is my, my work husband. I love him dearly. He's
Yeah.
the most special person in my life, but it just never clued in. And I think like one night after a friend's birthday, we were both just like a little bit liquored. And I think I leaned in or something. But like the second that we kind of clicked that that is something, it was just like, you've been right in front of me my entire
Right.
life. And we've never been able
Yeah.
to come to terms. And I think part of that is just because there is almost like a validation as a trans person and you're dating a cis person. There's like
Hmm.
a validation in your gender identity.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't, it's not positive and it's definitely internalized transphobia. But as a trans person, I found that I was constantly searching for validation of my gender identity being perceived by other people. And I
Interesting.
wasn't validating my divine feminine myself. So if I was dating a trans man, there was almost like a stigma attached to what does that mean for me in my divine feminine? Like
Yeah.
it just,
Yeah.
it's so strange how internalized things go. But like, I'm so glad that I was able to work through that. And, Cass has shared that some of his experience was similar, that we couldn't see past it to get to where
Right.
we are now. And now I'm in the happiest relationship of my entire life. Like we own
Amazing.
multiple
Congratulations.
companies. Thank you. Yeah, he's just the most fantastic person I've ever been blessed to know in my life. But I feel like when you find your person, you're recently-ish married, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and when you find your person, your gender identity, your queerness, like everything, it's not even a feeling anymore. It's just you're at
Yeah.
peace with your partner.
Yeah.
Nothing you have to explain. It's nothing you have to try to justify or help them understand. You just find a place where you're like, okay, like this is safety. This is home. This is where
Yeah.
I can recharge, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I feel like my wife and I have been together for almost 8 years now. So
oh,
we
congratulations.
she's thank you. She's been with me my entire journey. So like when we met, I still identified as a cis woman and I had like, completely different person. So she's been my rock through, all of my, my entire identity crisis. And she, provided me this space and comfort to explore that side of me. And it is funny though how much internalized transphobia really fucks you up though. It's like I remember like like right before like the lockdown happened, like that's where I was like really not in a good place. Like I had so much, I was like, I'm so unhappy, I have so much dysphoria, but and I remember like anytime like a trans masked person came up on line on a TV show or anything, I just felt such like anger. I was so like, oh, they're annoying or whatever. Like I was just like said stupid comments or whatever. I'd be like, I would ask my wife and I was like, "Do you think they're cute? Like, do you like them or something? Like and I like, what do you mean? Like you think they're cute or whatever?" And she, like, and I realized it was like I wanted to be that person so bad. And I was so jealous that they were fully what I wish I could come to terms with.
Right.
And I found myself like, I think it was a part of me like testing to see if like she's cool with them and I was
Hmm.
like, and then I was like, well, if you like them, then like maybe inside I was like, well, maybe you'd like me if I was like that, or like, would you? Because like I knew she'd be like, there's obviously a little bit of a learning curve,
Hmm.
and I have so much understanding for, I am changing in our relationship. Like what you know
Totally.
me to be is different, but I understand there's change and all that, but so yeah, she just gave me such a safe space to navigate everything and vice versa. Like, we had so many conversations and I, where I allowed her to feel what she needed to feel and how I felt what I needed to feel. And we learned together and we navigated this together. And then, she, helped me with my drains, talked to her, and she talks about she like helped me wipe my butt, and she was very, which is very TMI, but she brought that up the other day, and she was like, "It's so cute that I had to like wipe your butt when you were like post surgery," and I was like, "That's very sweet," and she's like, "I love that I got to do that," and I was like, "I am so grateful for you," but it's
I'm grateful for you, not grateful you had to do that. Grateful
yeah,
for
I'm
you.
so sorry, but yeah, but it's I mean, she is incredible and is so just makes me feel so safe and is very understanding and affirming. I feel so at peace within my identity around her, and even though like she's finishing up her BFA at school for
Amazing.
interior architecture, and her thesis is about building a wellness center that's about inclusivity and
Oh,
making a safe space for trans people and gender nonconforming people. And it's just like cool watching her like implement that into her like work and her passion.
wow.
And yeah, she's the best. And it's just I really reflect on a lot of the conversations I had while I was not okay with myself and having all that internalized transphobia. And I'm like, wow, I was so mean to these poor people on online. Like, and I never said anything publicly, of course. Like, but
Of
I would like,
course.
I would just like say these things, and I knew where it was coming from. And I asked my wife too after, and she's like, I could tell like that was you just having a lot of like your internalized shit. But
Totally.
she understood that I needed to have that, and she, I'm glad that she, you know, let me have that process. She like kind of knew that it was there, but I'm glad she didn't intervene in a way of like I needed to come to terms with it myself. And um it's yeah, it is also just amazing how much like your person can like just completely change, the world for you.
Totally. And I think that safety is what is so gentle and nourishing for queer individuals because we grow up feeling extremely unsafe in majority of
Yeah,
conditions. Like I'm not saying,
right.
every queer person has an unsafe feeling in their childhood, but majority of us have, whether it's
Right.
from bullying or, online harassment or, your parents being unsupportive or family members. There's a lot of queer people have gone through a feeling of unsafety. And when you find safety in a partner, it really just allows you to nourish yourself and
Mhm.
understand how to treat yourself with kindness because
Yeah.
you're being shown that.
Yeah.
And I think it's beautiful. There's one thing that parents, I feel like, are always concerned about. And even my partner's parents, who are the most incredible supportive advocates for the trans community, they said that one of the first fears is like, okay, but who is going to love you? Like, who is going to be your partner? And what does this mean for you in your future? I want you to have love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like it's just such a misconception that trans people have a hard time finding love because it's not,
Yeah.
we have a hard time finding love for ourselves the majority of the time, a lot harder
Yeah.
than we do finding a partner.
Isn't it
Um,
wild how that's like it just shows that there's this idea that there's no way, like, we're these freaks, there's no way someone can love you,
Trans
That's
people are
like
unlovable,
yeah,
100%,
like,
that
that's
narrative.
just it's wild.
Yeah,
And that's another part, like, going back again to, like, talking about, like, my music and all that, like, that's another thing that on top of just talking about, like, my experience as a trans person and my journey, I also want to show that, like, trans people can be loved and have long, healthy relationships and queer love and celebrating queer loves um it's been cool, like, when I've been, like, on tour and I've met people and some people I meet a lot of couples who are similar to me and my wife who are, like, one trans person, one cis person, and, the cis partner is always telling me that, they learn so much from my wife, and they look up to my wife and how she is in my relationship, and then, it's just cool that, like, that on separately from me as an individual, like, our relationship can also be a good example for trans and queer love and sharing that authentically, because it really is it's such a sad narrative that's like that you what 6 billion people in this world, and you think like every single one is gonna think trans person is unlovable. Like, what do you mean? You know?
right? I know. And there is such a narrative around trans people of being unlovable, and it's something me and my partner have both dealt with,
Mhm.
of, like, feeling unlovable, and, you go through your own experience of gender identity when you're transitioning and when you're coming to terms with it, where I think that is kind of a question of like, what does that mean for me in terms of love? And it wasn't really until I was loving myself where I
Hmm.
allowed myself to be loved by the right person. And I just think that
Yeah.
that's a journey, whether you're trans, whether you're a straight cis person, I just don't think that you'll ever find the person that will help inspire you to be you until you kind of start that journey yourself. Like there's a lot
Yeah.
of people that can help and teach you things along the way, but when you're in a place of self deprivation and depression and anxiety, it I found that for myself, I clung a lot easier to people that were kind of consuming that toxic narrative in my life rather than
Hmm.
stepping into something healthy and pushing myself and going to uncomfortable places of healing
Yeah.
and challenging my own narratives and my own internalized transphobia that I had that I didn't even
Yeah.
realize I
Yeah.
had until it was came time to the fact that my partner is trans masked and what that meant for me and my validation of my female gender identity. So it's
Yeah.
wild how much just psychological learning you do as a trans person constantly. I feel like I'm always learning something new, something
Yeah.
different.
It is such a shitty feeling too to be like, man, I am so embarrassed I had such internalized transphobia. Like I
Yeah.
beat myself up for it all the time. Which, it's not gonna be helpful for me to do because I've grown past it. But um it is just it's wild. It's and it's frustrating and it like breaks my heart that I felt those things about myself and other trans people. And it's interesting actually because as a public person, I will get comments every once in a while about, I mean, I get plenty of things, but like specifically about, basically, I've gotten comments from people that I can tell they're going through the similar thing of like they're projecting their fears and insecurities onto me because they're dealing with their own gender identity crisis and internalized transphobia, that they're doing to me what I did like when I was watching TV of a trans person or something.
Mhm.
And I usually don't respond, because it's like I'll get them in my DMs and I open them and do whatever. But it's interesting because now being on this side where people will say such, certain things where I'm like, I know where I read it and I know where it's coming from. And
Mhm.
if anything, sometimes I'm like, I send you love on your journey type of thing. But most of the time I don't respond because, it's just a lot. But it's interesting now being on this side and getting messages and being able to decode
Yeah.
when it's coming from a place of that, because I know what that's like and I know that thought process. And I've even gotten a message from someone like who like maybe a couple years ago had said something and then like they reached out to me and were like, "Hey, I'm realizing like I said really shitty things to you. Turns out I'm also trans and had this thing and that's why I
Wow.
was mean to you." And I was like, "Wow, I relate to you. I know that feeling. Like I appreciate your apology and I really appreciate that you even thought about reaching back out to me." But it's very interesting now being on the receiving end of it, but also being able to know where it's coming from. So I have empathy. I understand.
Yeah.
It's still shitty. It's like not nice. Because at least I never said anything directly to anybody, but you know what I mean?
Well, and especially
It's
now,
very
everyone
interesting.
has like the finger warrior, trigger happy to type something on a comment or whatever. But I mean, it is kind of beautiful in a weird way that that experience has now allowed you to identify when that's happening, provide empathy for that person, but also like have security in the way you feel of like, okay, cool. I don't need to take that on. I know exactly what they're going through and it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with me.
Yeah. It's been very, I think that's like the biggest lesson I've had to learn in the last couple years is like learning when I don't need to take on something, when I should just block something or delete a comment or block someone. Sometimes I'm in the mood to say something back and sometimes it feels nice. Like sometimes I
Yeah,
like to be a little silly and I'll comment back. But for the most part to learning that I don't, being also like somewhat public, like people feel very entitled to your time and space and your energy. And
totally.
and I've had to learn how to establish that boundary of like, just because you send me something doesn't mean I need to interact with it or respond to it. And I'm not even talking like, of course, like I'm only talking about like the negative stuff. Like most of the time,
Totally.
I'm, but learning to do that has helped a lot, and to be able to separate myself from that and realizing like most of the time it is not personal. As much as it can come off very personal, if someone say horrendous stuff to me, I know it's coming from their own shit and it says stuff about them and not about me. But this, it still hurts, stuff still hurts to read. But I'm learning to, kind of learn how to process it and also just be able to protect my peace. Because otherwise it would not be great if I did not take it.
No, and I think that's something important to talk about is protecting our peace because that's part of why me and my partner haven't announced yet. I have had a more public life over the last 2 years. He was, in a documentary called Crow's Transformation that follows
Mm.
the transition of a trans mask model going back into his modeling career after transition and what that meant for him. And because we've both lived in public light, we understand the weight that comes with it to a degree.
Mhm.
And for, the first while, we wanted to have our little love bubble, for lack of better words, of just like,
Yeah.
okay, like we know what happens when everything's out there in public and people feel very entitled to their opinion on you and your life and what's happening.
Mhm.
And I've had just like awful, awful things said, and I've had death threats, and I've had,
Yeah.
people that you just read some things sometimes. And honestly, sometimes like the death threats and the harmful ones are almost like a little bit more comical to me and
Mhm.
how they phrase everything. But it's like the ones that are just like, I wish you like absolutely no happiness in your life, blah, 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 that kind of
Yeah.
stinger. I'm like, holy fuck, man, you don't know me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm a decent person. Like, just
Yeah.
chill the
It
fuck out.
is it is wild being it's like it comes in waves, I think, like, oh, I won't get anything for a little bit, and then there'll be a period of time where for like 2 weeks straight, like every day I wake up and there's like 10 new comments saying horrendous stuff on like a certain post.
Yes, totally.
And
I think they have little groups where they find someone's page and then they share it in like a little
yeah.
hateful
Well,
Facebook
a
group and
couple
then they all do
times
it.
I've been posted on Libs of TikTok on Twitter, which was the worst day of my life. Uh, it was I don't remember. It was a video from like a year ago, I think, of something about my top surgery scars, and like I my video was shared on there, and I made the mistake of going and looking at it, and
Mm,
then very quickly I like blocked their account and just like it sucks because also how many comments and shit I've reported and nothing happens. I don't think
totally.
anything I've reported has ever been taken down to
Yeah,
this day,
same.
and
Yeah.
I've received and uh and then there was I got a bunch of comments on the video and someone's like, there's a whole Facebook page dedicated to like hating on shit like this or whatever. And realizing like when I started realizing like how evil some people are, that they're
Mm,
to the point where it's like broadcasting me to be hated on versus just some trolls online who are just bigots who are just asshole people and send one comment and that's it. Like that is like it hurts and it doesn't feel great. Like hearing that people want you dead does not feel great. However, it's somewhat easy to be like, you are quite literally nobody to me, and what it doesn't matter. But
mhm.
it's when I've experienced these moments of like this broadcast about it, about my page and my identity, it's like, and that's scary because especially on like a huge page of like libs of TikTok, like that's like that's the times get like actually scared because also I'm like I don't even know how insane all those people are and how
Totally.
and what they're capable of. But also that's when I get like waves of comments and stuff. And that's when it can be overwhelming. Like everyone once in a while, it's easy. But when I'm getting like multiple a
Yeah.
day, it's hard not to take that on and not to dwell on it and just that reality. Like, I live in California, so I'm very, very safe here. And I
Yeah.
have a very good group of friends, and they're all queer. So I'm in a very good bubble. And so
Mm,
every once in a while, though, it is important for me to remind myself that I do live in a bubble, that like outside of this state, outside of my bubble, like majority of people in this world aren't okay with us,
yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to kind of accept that. And not even accept that, but just to be like, that is the reality when you step outside of your, love bubble or your, little
Totally.
safe bubble. Um,
So when you went on
And
tour, because I feel like this kind of leads into that, which was something that I
yeah.
wanted to ask you, because when I was watching one of your lives, you had talked about going on tour, and I think something had happened. I don't know if it was in Philly or somewhere. I think you were evacuated because somebody had a gun, or there
Mhm.
was thoughts that somebody had a gun. And then it kind of just got me thinking about what that tour was like for you. Because was that the tour that you did with G Flip?
Yes.
Okay, so when you guys are going through like where you're gonna go
Yeah.
and your safety, I just want to know where you find the courage to overcome the fear to go and perform at those places because you are putting yourself in a
Mhm.
possibly unsafe condition. You don't know what crowds are
Yeah.
coming in and who's coming to
Yeah.
see you, especially after being put on a page like that. And
Yeah.
then, you go and tour. So how do you find the bravery and courage to step out of that fear and continue to do what you do and show up for all of your fans and, the queer population that deserve to have people on stage, sharing what their talent is with us, but also what steps do you take to ensure that you're trying to be as safe as you possibly can?
Yeah. So the first tour I ever went on was last year. I went with Lawrence Anderson. And it was actually my wife who, before I went, she was like, I need you to realize like where you're going. Like this was like we were going more south on that tour. So like I think we were driving through states like Alabama, to get
Mhm.
through places. And she was like, I love you and I'm worried when you're gone and all that stuff. And she's like, I know that you obviously talk about your identity on stage, but like you need to in certain states, like you need to not be alone in certain places. Like she basically like, and she made me, I didn't even think about that. And so
Mm,
she was the one who like really like woke my eyes up where I realized like, oh, like you're right. And
mhm.
so especially on this tour, with G Flip, I have two people with me on tour and one of them is also non-binary. But basically we were like, all right, here's the deal. Like we need to always be together, especially when we get to certain parts of the country. Um, and when I go to like gas stations, for example, to use the restroom, that can be hard depending on where I am. I don't really ever know which one to go into. I kind of just have to gauge the room. Um, if ideally they're single stalls, I don't have to worry about it. But um, usually, like my tour manager is a cis woman, so she would like anytime we went to the restroom. Usually, the three of us always went together, and we neither me or my non-binary keyboardist would go alone. So there's always like stuff like that where it's like at least we're with someone. Like so, we had like a routine of how we did stuff, like use the bathroom and stuff. But when it comes to being on stage, like I don't know. I think part of it is, if I'm honest, like there's a little bit of ignorance is bliss a little bit. I mean, I think I've been fortunate not to have had to deal with necessarily anything dangerous to me yet, like just purely of who I am. So I think there's a part of me that's like, if I really am honest with myself, I think there's a part of me that's like, oh, I'm okay. Cause like there's all these queer people in this room and, but then it's the moment I'm off stage that I'm reminded, like, I
Mhm.
remember like where we are, where we're traveling. And I don't know. I think just like being on stage and just seeing and feeling like how important it is to be in that space and to celebrate queerness in that space. And and for me, anytime I play a show, I want anyone to feel like if they can't be themselves at home, that this is a place they can be themselves. This is a place they can celebrate themselves. That this the safest of spaces. And
Oh,
so
that's so beautiful.
if I can provide that by being vulnerable on stage and being an example there, then I want to do that. Um, but as long as I'm aware, it comes like, so I think the only time, like when we were in Nashville, I think I remember it was very small, crowded venue. Obviously, Nashville is, it's its own bubble, but Tennessee is not a great place for trans people.
Yeah.
And I remember so my tour manager who's also selling the merch was in the back of the venue, and she had told me like there were some people that she just didn't got weird vibes from. And that was the only venue where like nothing happened. Like I'll preface it, but she was like, that was the first time she told me like that was the first time while I was on stage that she felt like she like had like she like pulled out her like pocket knife in her hand just in case because she felt this weird because we're obviously on edge because of where we are. So
Totally.
I'm glad that everyone's aware. But like when she told me that, I was like, that was the first time where I like was kind of reminded of like totally could be a chance that in a state like Tennessee that people target like queer shows like that has obviously like when we talk about like wolves and stuff like that like we that unfortunately is real or it happens.
Yeah.
And I think just even her having the fear in that moment and telling me post show was a wake up call of like, oh shit, yeah, like this is very real. Like we can talk about let's be safe and precautious, but the first time she's very tough. Like when she feels fear, it's real.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, like they ended up leaving, nothing happened, but like for her to have that and tell me that she felt like she was ready to do something, I was like, all right, like that is what comes with. And I think what would I wish I know it also just comes with like hoping that venues are aware when they're hiring trans acts and aware of where they are. And I think
You
there
would
needs to be also
think,
more
but
of a responsibility on like venues and shit.
yes,
Um
100%. I agree. Like, I feel like that is 100% where it needs to start is in
yeah,
awareness and with people actually being allies, not just trying to make a quick buck off of trans
yeah,
performers, but
yeah,
ensuring the trans performers' safety first and foremost.
yeah. So it's like it's 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 always in the back of my mind depending on where we're traveling and it's really the most nervous I honestly get is when we're in like the middle of nowhere and I'm using the restroom.
Yeah.
Because, there's when you get in the middle of America, it is scary out there. And I've had, I go quickly in and out of there. I am as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Depending on where I go, sometimes I'll wear like a big hoodie and go into the men's room and just like, kind of wobble a little bit and just like
Mhm.
put on this like masculine energy. Um, but it's hard. It sucks that I had to like decipher like which restroom is going to be safer for me today.
Yeah.
But usually that's the scariest part of being on tour is when we're not in these big cities and stuff.
And again, like, it's a conversation about going to the bathroom, like, something so simple that everybody has to do that trans people, literally becomes a, like, mental mind game of where am I the most safe? And even
Yeah,
then, I don't feel safe in this situation. I'm just choosing the lesser of two evils, but both are
exactly. Yeah,
equally terrifying, you know? And that's
and
just
it's wild because if you were to ask people like who are weird about and like what do you want me to do? Poop
yeah,
outside? You know what I mean? Like I got to do it. Like
yeah.
so, you tell me your solution then.
Totally.
But
Why
it's
don't I
like it
just pee
comes
on your
from
leg? Like, is that what you're
yeah,
looking for? A
right.
golden shower? Like, I don't really understand why you're so infatuated with where I pee, but like,
Yeah, and they're just like I think it just also is such deep idea that like, well, you're doing it to yourselves because you're choosing to be trans, so you have to now deal with the fact that we don't accept you. And
yeah.
I can sense that a lot when we talk about restrooms and stuff. Is there's that idea because when you really do look in someone's eyes and you're like, what do you want me to do? Where do
Mhm.
I go? Like, especially like when people start talking about like restrooms needing to be for your sex assigned at birth, and you have a trans man with a like a full beard, like very like full beard, very cis assuming. And then you say, okay, where do you want this person to go? Because based
Mm.
off your logic, they're a woman. But and then when it's like it's always funny trying to get a gotcha with transphobes, but realizing how silly it all is quite ridiculous. But it's like I need to pee. It's not that big of a deal.
Totally. And in that logic, they would rather have my partner Cass go into the bathroom and me go into the men's, which
Yeah.
doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, the whole thing, it just
The
doesn't
logic makes no sense.
makes no sense. And then trying to pin it as like, feminine safety because trans women are, somehow going to assault a woman in the bathroom. It's, all of the statistics show the exact opposite of that. The trans
Yeah.
feminine person is at most risk in that bathroom and they're literally just trying to pee. And, we can go on and on about this, but
Yeah, the bathrooms are it is just it's comical how obsessed people are with it when I'm like when you really think about like what we're doing is like just such a just trying to pee and get out of there, you know?
yeah. And it's hard when you think about that feeling of unsafety though. Me and Cass had talked about going to a music festival
Hmm.
that is in West Virginia. It's a rock festival, and we were so
Hmm.
excited, and we had to go. I think to can't remember if this is before New York or after New York. We had to go to New York for work, and then we were going to the UK for a bit. And so we were just going to road trip from here
Yeah.
in Vancouver all the way up to West Virginia and then fly out from there to where we needed to go. And just in trying to do research of where we should be driving through became this huge thing of, are we safe doing this? And also, like,
Yeah.
are we safe at this festival? And are we,
Yeah.
are we putting ourselves at an unnecessary risk? And I was just like, nobody understands what it's like traveling as a trans person. And this isn't, going and traveling to the Middle East. This isn't traveling, you know, anywhere where it's considered illegal to be us, but this
Yeah.
is traveling in our backyard. And it's still,
Yeah.
even places in Alberta right now are just so
Mhm.
fueled by hate and segregation of people. It's scary to think of, okay, well, where can I go?
Yeah. Like I was at the gym with my brother the other day and he wanted to go swimming after a workout. And I was like, sure, I'll join you. And then all I wanted to do was swim. It's all I just wanted to go swimming, right? And it turned into me having to figure out like, okay, where do I go change? Which because the only way to get to the pool also was through the lockers, which was stupid design.
Yeah.
And so I was like, if I go, I do not feel comfortable going to the women's locker room by myself because especially in locker rooms, it's scarier because people are undressed and showering. Like it is a lot more intense for me. It's a lot scarier for me to navigate locker rooms. So I didn't want to go there by myself because if I'm not with my wife, then I do not feel safe going in there by myself. So then I was like, all right, I made a decision to go in the men's locker room with my brother, which I have never gone into a men's gym locker room before. So that was also very interesting. But then I was like, cool. So when I get in there, I need to now go instead of publicly changing like everyone else, I had to go find a bathroom to go change into and then keep my shirt on and then like go swim. And then like now I have to go like into the like it was this whole thing of like I have to figure out how to safely just get ready to go swimming. I'm just trying to go
Mm.
swimming and it's
Yeah.
turning into this like mental gymnastics.
Totally. There's
And
50 extra steps for something that nobody
right.
else would even consider a thought regarding.
Right, and if and if they there's aren't there wasn't even one single gender neutral restroom, and that would have just solved everything too, if I could just go in there and change them, yeah, but, like and the fact that you had to go through a locker room to get to the pool is also frustrating, but, like, it
Mm.
was I'm very also lucky to be have been with my brother who's, like, the world's greatest ally besides my wife, and, he's very much, like, he's making sure I'm okay, he's following my footsteps of what I need, but I was texting my wife during it because again, like, this is what her thesis is literally on, and I was like, you're working on your thesis and I'm quite literally having to navigate how to just go swim,
Yeah,
to the point where I almost was like, maybe I don't go because it's like too much to figure out. And I'm like, that's just so frustrating and it's
totally.
such a,
And defeating to be like, fuck, I
yeah,
don't get to do something that I wanted to do that's really simple because I'm now doing mental gymnastics, like you said,
right.
about how the fuck to do this safely.
Yeah. And, it's just so silly. Like, and again, like if there was even just one gender restroom would have solved my issue.
Yeah,
But the fact there's not even that alone is stupid.
yeah,
Um, and it is just again, like you said, it's like this is very not very, but like minimal compared to other places where it's illegal and we both understand being in North America is a lot different, but still like the fact that this is like just a daily occurrence. Um, and people just want to dehumanize and belittle trans people all the time and villainize us and be like, what, just mock. And it's so exhausting.
it is exhausting. And I think that I definitely have days where I wake up, um, and so does my partner, where we just kind of look at each other and we're like, our capacity is low today. Or,
Yeah.
news will come out about something happening, or we'll see something on social media, or we'll have a friend reach out to us and share news. And it's just, we're both big advocates in the trans community, Cass specifically in Vancouver, and me with one of our companies. And there's just days where you're like, I can't advocate today. I need to go
Yeah.
inwards. I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I'm like, I feel defeated by the world. But
Yeah.
for me, it's conversations like this that really spark that inspiration and drive for me to be like, oh my God, okay, we're not alone. We have
Yeah.
allies everywhere. There's people going through the same experiences,
Yeah.
but are also feeling exhausted. And we are going to lift each other up and we're going to get out of this and we're going to feel good. And that's kind of what I hope that the trans youth that are feeling that overwhelm right now and that anxiety and that just unsettling exhaustion of why can't I just exist in this world?
Yeah.
um, there are people that are fighting so that you can, and we're going to keep fighting. We're not going to stop fighting. We're here. We're going to keep doing what we can do to fight the good fight and make sure that every kid feels safe and valued and allowed to be themselves wherever they are.
Yeah. 100%.
When you first discovered, kind of off topic here, but when you first discovered the healing qualities of music for you, because I relate very much to that. Like I have
Hmm.
such a healing space when it comes to music that I've, created for myself and had people now create with me when it comes to music. How did you find that like music was your therapy, but it was also something that was going to propel your life forward?
I think, as cheesy as it sounds, I've been doing music my whole life. Like it's all I've ever known. Um, I grew up in a fairly musical family. I was always encouraged to do music. My dad, one of the greatest things I think he did as a parent was me and my brother and I always have to do one sport and one instrument. We got to pick and we could change it, but it was always, we had to be doing one sport and one
Oh, I
instrument. And
love
so,
that.
I played soccer my entire upbringing. I played for like 18 years, and then I started with piano, and then took guitar lessons and did vocal lessons. Like I was always, and we had a grand piano in the home. Like my dad sang, so when I always played piano together. Like I'm very lucky that my doing music was always highly encouraged. It was never ever like something I couldn't do. It was always celebrated. And so I'm very grateful for that. So I never felt that pressure. So it's just something that I always was doing. I always was singing and writing and just always listening to music. And I remember when I put out like one day I was like, oh, I'm just gonna put out I'm gonna put out a song on Spotify this time. Like I uploaded YouTube videos and stuff like that, but I'd put out a couple songs on Spotify, and I had one cover of "Somewhere Only We Know." Started doing really well on Spotify. An algorithm just did well. So I started to see a little bit of
I think that was the
success.
first song I heard from you, actually.
Amazing, yeah. So I
Yeah.
started getting a little bit of success on Spotify. Obviously, like online, I was building like my own, just being a queer person in a queer relationship. Me and my wife met on Tumblr, so like we had a little bit of like a following for our relationship. So it was
Uh,
just like I was just doing music and people resonated with it, and it just naturally, I got very lucky that it just naturally connected with people and just started to build. And I just there wasn't any part in me that felt like anything else felt right. Like I didn't know I could get to the point that I am now and where I'm continuing to build. But I just was like, I just kept doing it. And I was just doing it while I was in school and putting out music and just kept following a path and things were falling into place. And it just felt very like divine for me. Like it was what's meant
mm,
to happen and it's all I've ever known and always knew what I was meant to do. And so I kind of just was like following life and just seeing where it takes me and it feels very clearly like this is my path and what I'm meant to be doing.
I think
Um
that shows in your writing too, because I think a lot of people try to write music that moves people, and then there's just people that are born with the gift of storytelling and how they express through their music, and that's definitely something that you have where you
well,
can put
thank
on
you.
any one of your songs and you can place yourself in that emotion so deeply and like really feel and be moved by it. And that's also kind of how I've used music to heal, is
Mhm.
by allowing myself to go into those spaces that people create with their music and feel that and then apply that to my life and when I felt that way and then, go through my healing
Yeah,
journey. as a
Yeah,
tool?
that's how I felt. Like I always loved, like I resonated with so much, like music was is like I said, always has been a thing. I always was listening to music, and I it would just really help me feel certain emotions, and then I was like, I it's funny, I'm not great with words when it comes to just like writing essays or just like journaling or anything. Like I'm very specifically like when it comes to like lyrics, that's what I'm good at. And so it just kind of was this way of me to like journal in a way for myself of like like you said, like I felt what it was like to find the song that helped me through something.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, so I can also do that for myself. I mean, it turns out I could do it for other people as well, you know. And
Amazing.
it was a way that I could put to paper like what I was feeling and processing it. And then also on top of like the feeling of a song coming together is so special and so inspiring to me. And to know you've written a good song also feels great. And also knowing that and the feeling of knowing other people are going to hear it and resonate with it or interpret it in the way they do. Like all of that is part of this, like just it just feels so inherent to me and feels like very, I guess, divine. And it also just like helps me through a lot of stuff. So yeah.
I love that. So, something that I struggle with, and this was actually a complex I had about the podcast, is my voice. And I think it's something that a lot of trans experience has struggled with from one side or the other.
Mhm.
I would, do interviews sometimes or anything, but anything involving my voice. It's funny, like pre-transition, it was always like, oh, you sound like a girl, like blah, blah, blah. Then I
Mhm.
transition and it's never, you're not girl enough. Like now you sound like a
Yeah.
boy, blah, blah, blah. And it's just
Yeah.
like, hey, fuck, I can never impress you. But
Right.
it, I developed a complex about my voice, which it's, it's very challenging as a trans advocate because you're trying to use your voice, but then you're also self-conscious of it, but you want to I wanted to find my confidence. And when we talked about doing a podcast, I originally said no, because I didn't want to hear myself just
Yeah.
in conversations constantly. And in music, that's something that I really struggled with. Like, I wouldn't consider myself a great singer at all, but I love singing and it's something
Yeah.
that brings me happiness. But when I listen back to anything that I've like jokingly recorded, it's always like,
Yeah.
oh, I really struggle with how that sounds and feeling like my voice isn't completely matching my gender identity. So I'm
Right.
wondering if you've ever had a struggle like that. And if you had, to any trans musicians out there that are struggling with that, what your advice would be to them.
Amazing. So it's actually interesting. The only I don't feel that way when it comes to hearing my singing. I only really feel that when I hear my speaking voice.
Really?
Sometimes mainly when I hear like when I was younger and I hear my music, then I'm like, okay, well also I'm like a teenager. So of course my voice was like felt younger and I was like, that sounds so like girly or whatever. But I really surprisingly don't feel dysphoria when it comes to my singing voice. Like um I I don't know. I just it doesn't I don't feel that. But I feel it with my speaking voice sometimes, not
Mm,
always. But I think I especially like if I'm on the phone, like or sometimes in interviews, I find that like AFAB urge to like, sound nice and very soft and dainty.
yeah.
And I'm trying to unlearn that because it's also like it's not even just tied to like my transness, but just like unlearning that gender role of like having to sound a certain way.
Mm,
But I really only feel it when when I'm speaking. So like if I listen back to an interview or a podcast, so that's when I'm kind of like, I hear my voice a certain way. But if I'm hearing my voice singing, I'm always like pretty good. I don't hear
well,
that.
you're
I don't hear the
amazing.
same
So I'm glad
thank
that
you.
you can recognize
I
that
don't
as well. But
but I don't hear the same dysphoria. But like there's sometimes I wish like, I think about like my voice, my speaking voice. I'm like, okay, I wish it was a little deeper or something. But I don't really feel anything as strong as like the other places in my life that I have dysphoria. But it's interesting because I'm curious. So I'm not on testosterone, but I've been curious about microdosing testosterone. However, the downfall with that is you can't delegate where you want the testosterone to work or the
mhm,
hormones to work.
mhm,
Like I know what I would like it to do, but I can't tell my body don't touch my vocal cords. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
I can't do that. And that's the one thing that is irreversible. So that's what's preventing me from ever trying that, because like I love my singing voice. I feel very connected to it. And I would be heartbroken if that were to ever change. And I would never want to risk that. So that's actually, if anything I struggle with is that, is like I would, for my dysphoria in general, I would love to try microdosing testosterone, but I hate it because I don't want to change my voice.
Yeah.
And it's obviously like my career and who I am. So if anything, that's where I get that kind of disconnect is in it's the one, it's like the one thing I don't want to risk.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I don't know. I think, one thing that helped just like for me when anytime I do feel, a certain way about my singing voices, um, I've written so many songs in so many different keys and realizing, um, one thing that helped is like learning like what range felt the best for me.
Mhm.
And like, I know now kind of, I have an idea of like what key is like, not only just like, like easy for me to sing, but also feels right in the way that I'm performing it feels like right in a gender sense of like feels
Yeah.
like right in that way. Um, so like, I feel like that would be maybe thing if any advice is like figuring out like, you can play around with ranges and keys and figure out what feels the best for you as a musician, but also as a trans musician.
Mm.
Other than that, like I really don't, my dysphoria about my voice really comes when I'm speaking,
Mm.
which is
And it's funny
interesting.
that, yeah, I know it's, we all, I think, at some moment or another, hate listening to ourselves as people, not even just as trans
Yeah,
people, as people. I
right.
think you hear yourself and you're like, fuck,
It's
oh my God,
very,
what is
very
that?
common. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with trans people, there's obviously a bit of an added like depth to it because sometimes you're like, oh my God, that doesn't sound at all like what I feel like inside. And it's
Yeah,
almost that reminder of
absolutely.
looking in the mirror and being like, oh, I don't look at all what I feel like I should look like. You
Yeah.
get that like auditory version of that. So I think, yeah, it's interesting to hear that, playing around with keys and how that isn't something that is a vocal point for you because I've heard, from a few musicians that that was something that they were nervous of. Like I talked with Lucas, who's the lead singer of the Clicks that I was telling you about
Yeah.
before, and they transitioned throughout. So the first record that they put out, I believe, and I may be kind of fucking up this timeline, but I believe the first record came out and they were identifying as lesbian and had not
Mhm.
been on any hormones. And then I believe the second one was they started transition, and then the third was kind of where you can really hear the difference in their
Yeah.
tone and performance.
Mhm.
So I think, it's always interesting, and it always amazes me the courage that trans people find and the tools that they create to develop and find comfort and love themselves. And I think that everything that you're doing is just, it's so admirable, and it's something that I get to take away from like leaving this conversation today. I feel so full and grateful and great that
Aw.
there's people like you in the world, and that you're not afraid to share your talent, and that you're being loud for the youth and for people around. And you're such an advocate and such a wonderful person for trans youth to look up to. So thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It means a lot. And I hope
Thank
that
you.
this is something that we can circle back to at a later date and have some new ideas on a couple of these topics and see what
Absolutely.
progression has happened.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me and allowing me to, for giving me the platform to speak a little bit, and I appreciate it.
Of course, absolutely. Anytime. You're always welcome at the Braveyard.
Amazing. I will be back.
All right. Well, I hope you guys got as much out of that as I did. There's something so magical as a trans person being able to sit down with another trans person and just have open dialogue about our journeys that creates such a safe space to be able to share. And I got so much value from this conversation. It's really rewarding to sit down also with somebody that you just have adored and been such a big fan of, and then be able to just have such a beautiful human experience with. So I hope that this conversation has brought you as much love and happiness as I got from it. Coming up next week, we also have an amazing guest from Netflix The Circle Season 1. We have Sammy Cimarelli in the house. She is an LGBTQ advocate, but honestly, just an advocate for absolutely everybody in the world. She's an all-round, absolutely fantastic person, and it's such a great conversation that I learned so much from. I can't wait for you to hear it, so make sure you tune in to the next episode with Sammy Cimarelli. One last thank you to Miki Ratsula for coming on, and we'll see you next time at the Brave Yard.